Marcus Chen had been living alone on the frontier planet Kepler 442b for 18 months. The planet was far from any major trade routes. Most people called it a death sentence. But Marcus did not mind. He had a job to do. He ran the atmospheric monitoring station that tracked the planet's weather patterns. The monitoring station was small but well built. It had thick walls and a strong roof. Marcus had everything he needed inside: food for many months, water recyclers that never broke down, books to read during the long nights, and most important of all, equipment that could survive the electromagnetic storms that made this planet famous across the galaxy. These storms were not like normal weather. They came without warning and lasted for weeks. The electromagnetic pulses could destroy any electronic device that was not properly shielded. Most species avoided this planet completely. Even the bravest space travelers stayed away when storm season approached. But Marcus had studied these storms for years. He understood them. His equipment was built to handle them. His shelter had special shielding that could protect everything inside. While other species saw danger, Marcus saw interesting weather patterns that needed to be recorded and studied. On this particular day, Marcus noticed the signs early. The air felt different. The instruments showed strange readings. A massive storm system was building in the upper atmosphere. This one looked bigger than usual. Much bigger. Marcus began his usual preparations. He checked all the shielding on his equipment. He sealed the extra food containers. He made sure the water systems were working perfectly. He charged all his backup power cells. Everything had to be ready before the storm arrived. As he worked, Marcus felt excited rather than afraid. Each storm was different. Each one taught him something new about how electromagnetic fields behaved in this planet's atmosphere. His research was helping scientists across the galaxy understand these rare weather phenomena. The storm hit 3 hours later. Marcus watched from his small observation window as the sky turned dark purple. Lightning that was not really lightning flashed between the clouds. The electromagnetic pulses began as small waves. Then they grew stronger and stronger. The wind started slowly but quickly became a roaring monster. Trees that had stood for hundreds of years began to bend like grass. The sound was incredible. It was like standing inside a waterfall made of pure noise. Marcus had experienced many storms, but this one was special. It was more powerful than anything he had seen before. Through the thick glass of his window, Marcus could see debris flying through the air. Rocks the size of his fist moved like leaves in a gentle breeze. Small trees were ripped from the ground and carried away. The electromagnetic pulses made the air itself glow with strange colors. Marcus was recording everything on his shielded instruments when he saw something that made him stop. Through the chaos of the storm, something was moving. Not debris blown by the wind. Something was walking. At first, Marcus thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Nothing could survive out there. The wind alone would kill most creatures. The electromagnetic pulses would destroy any electronic equipment. But as he watched more carefully, he realized he was right. Something was definitely out there. The figure was tall and moved in a strange way. It had more than 2 arms. Marcus recognized the movement pattern immediately. It was a Zilani. But what was a Zilani doing on this planet? And how was it still alive in this storm? The Zilani was struggling. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that it was injured. Its biosuit was damaged. Sparks were flying from the torn sections. The suit that should have protected it from the environment was failing. Marcus watched as the figure stumbled and almost fell. The storm was getting stronger every minute. If the Zilani stayed outside much longer, it would die. There was no question about that. The electromagnetic pulses alone would stop its heart within hours. Without thinking, Marcus ran to his emergency beacon. He turned it on and pointed it toward the struggling figure. The beacon used a frequency that could cut through electromagnetic interference. It would show the Zilani where to find safety. The response was immediate. The figure changed direction and began moving toward the shelter. Marcus could see it was moving faster now, but also more unsteadily. The Zilani was using its last strength to reach safety. Marcus prepared his airlock. The system was designed to handle emergencies like this. It could cycle quickly to let someone inside without letting the storm follow them. He gathered medical supplies from his emergency kit. He did not know much about Zilani biology, but he knew they needed similar atmospheric conditions to humans. As he waited, Marcus wondered what had brought a Zilani to this remote planet. They were scientists and explorers, but they usually worked in groups. They rarely traveled alone to dangerous places, and they definitely avoided planets with electromagnetic storms. Their technology was more sensitive to electromagnetic interference than human equipment. The airlock alarm chimed. Someone was outside. Marcus activated the outer door and watched through the monitor as the Zilani stumbled inside. The figure was definitely female, based on the body shape and movement patterns. Her biosuit was in terrible condition. Parts of it were completely destroyed. Marcus started the airlock cycle. It took 90 seconds to complete. During that time, he could see the Zilani through the monitor. She was leaning against the wall, clearly exhausted. Her forearms hung at her sides. Her head was down. She looked like someone who had used every bit of strength just to survive. The inner door opened with a soft hiss. The Zilani stepped into his shelter, bringing the smell of ozone and burned electronics with her. She was tall, maybe 7 feet, with the elegant build that all Zilani possessed. Her skin had a blue tint that was darker than usual, probably from stress or injury. Silver markings ran along her arms and face in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated her professional status. But what happened next surprised Marcus completely. The moment the Zilani saw him, really saw him as a human, she froze. Her large eyes went wide. Her forearms went completely rigid. She pressed herself back against the wall as if she had seen something terrifying. Marcus had seen that look before. It was the look that most species gave humans when they first met them in person. It was not hatred or anger. It was fear. Pure instinctive fear that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside them. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the shelter, everything had become very quiet. The Zilani stared at Marcus. Marcus stared back at her. Both of them knew that this was going to be a very long storm. The silence in the shelter felt heavy and strange. Outside, the electromagnetic storm continued to rage with incredible power. Inside, Marcus and the Zilani female watched each other carefully. She had not moved from her position against the wall. Her forearms remained rigid at her sides. Her large eyes never left his face. Marcus knew he had to be very careful about what he did next. The Zilani was clearly injured and exhausted. Her biosuit was damaged beyond repair. She needed help, but she was also terrified of him. Any sudden movement might make her panic. He slowly raised his hands where she could see them. His movements were gentle and deliberate. He did not want to startle her. When he spoke, he kept his voice soft and calm. "My name is Marcus Chen. You are safe here. The storm cannot hurt you inside this shelter." The Zilani did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved quickly around the room, taking in everything she could see. Marcus realized she was looking for escape routes. She was evaluating threats. She was trying to figure out if she was in more danger inside with him than outside in the storm. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky but clear. Zilani voices had a musical quality that humans often found beautiful. But right now her voice carried obvious fear. "I am Lyra Kessathera. I'm a xenobiologist. My research ship crashed during the storm. I had to abandon it when the electromagnetic pulses started damaging the life support systems." Marcus nodded slowly. That explained what she was doing on this planet. Xenobiologists often studied life forms in extreme environments, but it did not explain why she was alone or why her ship was not better protected against electromagnetic interference. "Your ship should have had better shielding," Marcus said carefully. "Zilani technology is usually very advanced." Lyra's expression became more guarded. "It was damaged in an accident before I reached this system. I was trying to make emergency repairs when the storm hit. I barely had time to get to the surface before the ship's systems failed completely." Marcus could tell there was more to the story, but he did not push for details. Right now, the important thing was helping her recover from her ordeal. He could see that she was injured. There were burns on her arms where her biosuit had been damaged. She was also shivering, which meant she was probably dehydrated and exhausted. "You need medical attention," Marcus said. "I have supplies that can help, but I need to check your injuries." Lyra's reaction was immediate and strong. She pressed herself further back against the wall. Her forearms came up in a defensive position. "No, do not come closer. I will be fine." Marcus stopped moving and held up his hands again. He understood her fear, but it was frustrating. She was clearly hurt and needed help. However, forcing the issue would only make things worse. Marcus knew why Lyra was so afraid. Humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy. It was not a reputation based on cruelty or evil. It was based on something that other species found even more disturbing: Humans were survivors. They were adaptable. They were unpredictable. And they were very, very dangerous when they needed to be. Over the past century since first contact, stories about humans had spread throughout galactic civilization. Most of them were true. Humans had survived in environments that killed other species. They had fought wars that other species surrendered before starting. They had explored regions of space that other species considered too dangerous to approach. But the stories had grown in the telling. Humans were described as beings who felt no fear, as creatures who could kill without emotion, as a species that formed dangerous attachments and would fight to the death for almost any reason. The galaxy saw humans as living weapons that could think and plan. The truth was more complicated. Humans did feel fear. They just did not let fear stop them from doing what needed to be done. They could kill, but most of them hated doing it. They formed strong emotional bonds, but that was usually what made them fight so hard to protect others. Marcus had encountered this fear many times during his career. Other species worked with humans because humans were useful, but they were always nervous. They always watched for signs of aggression. They always seemed to expect that humans might suddenly become violent for no apparent reason. Looking at Lyra now, Marcus could see all of those fears reflected in her eyes. She was watching him the way a small animal watches a predator. She was ready to run or fight at the first sign of danger, but there was nowhere to run. The storm outside would kill her within minutes. "I understand that you are afraid of me," Marcus said quietly. "I know what other species believe about humans, but I promise you that I will not hurt you. I just want to help you survive until the storm passes." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. That is what a predator would say to keep its prey calm. Marcus felt a flash of frustration, but he kept it hidden. She was right to be cautious. From her perspective, she was trapped in a small space with something that her entire species considered dangerous. The fact that he was offering help did not mean much. Predators often seemed helpful at first. "If I wanted to hurt you, I would not have helped you get inside," Marcus pointed out. "I would have left you in the storm." Lyra considered this for a moment. "Perhaps you want something from me first. Information about my research. Or you want to study how Zilani physiology responds to stress and fear." Marcus sighed quietly. He could see that logic and reasonable arguments were not going to work. Lyra had been taught to fear humans since childhood. Those kinds of deep fears could not be overcome with words alone. He would have to prove his intentions through actions. The storm continued to rage outside. Through the small observation window, they could see the electromagnetic displays painting the sky in strange colors. This particular storm looked like it would last for several days. Marcus and Lyra were going to be stuck together for a long time. Marcus decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to convince Lyra that he was harmless, he would simply go about his normal routine. He would let her see how he actually behaved when he was not trying to impress anyone. "I am going to check my instruments," Marcus said. "The storm is providing some very interesting data. You can stay where you are. I will not come near you unless you ask me to." Marcus turned away from Lyra and walked to his monitoring station. He could feel her eyes on him as he moved. Every step was being analyzed for signs of deception or aggression. He tried to move naturally, the way he always did when he was alone. The instruments were recording incredible amounts of data about the storm. The electromagnetic patterns were unlike anything Marcus had seen before. He became genuinely absorbed in his work, taking notes and adjusting settings to capture the best possible measurements. After a while, Marcus became aware that Lyra was watching him differently. She was no longer focused entirely on escape routes and defensive positions. She was actually looking at what he was doing. Her scientific curiosity was beginning to overcome her fear. The storm would give them plenty of time to get to know each other. Marcus just hoped that by the time it was over, Lyra would understand that not every human was the monster that her people's stories described. Hours passed while the storm continued to rage outside. Marcus worked at his monitoring station, recording data and making notes about the unusual electromagnetic patterns. Lyra remained pressed against the far wall, watching his every movement with careful attention. As time went on, Marcus began to notice that Lyra was shivering more frequently. Her blue-tinted skin was becoming darker, which he knew was a sign of stress or illness in Zilani physiology. The burns on her arms where her biosuit had been damaged were getting worse. She needed medical attention whether she wanted it or not. Marcus decided to try a different approach. Instead of offering to help her directly, he would simply provide the things she needed and let her choose whether to use them. "I'm going to prepare some food," Marcus announced without looking at her. "I always eat at this time when I am monitoring a storm. There will be extra if you want some." Marcus went to his food storage area and began preparing a simple meal. He chose foods that he knew were safe for Zilani digestive systems. Most galactic species had similar nutritional requirements, but there were important differences that could be dangerous if ignored. As he worked, Marcus began talking quietly about what he was doing. He explained how the food storage systems worked in an environment with electromagnetic storms. He described the special containers that kept everything fresh for months at a time. He talked about the water recycling systems and how they had been designed to work even during the worst weather. Marcus was not really talking to Lyra. He was talking the way he usually did when he was alone. During long months by himself, he had developed the habit of explaining his actions out loud. It helped him think through problems and stay mentally sharp. But it also had an unexpected effect on Lyra. She began to listen to what he was saying rather than just watching what he was doing. Marcus was not trying to impress her or convince her of anything. He was simply sharing information about how things worked. It was the kind of technical discussion that any scientist would find interesting. When the food was ready, Marcus placed a portion on a plate and set it on the floor halfway between himself and Lyra. He also placed a container of water nearby. Then he took his own food back to his monitoring station and continued working while he ate. Lyra stared at the food for a long time. Marcus could see her internal struggle. She was hungry and thirsty. The food smelled good and appeared to be safe for her species. But accepting food from a human felt like accepting help from a predator. Her instincts told her it might be a trap. Finally, hunger won over fear. Lyra carefully approached the food, keeping her eyes on Marcus the entire time. She picked up the plate and water container quickly and retreated to her corner. Only then did she begin to eat. Marcus continued working as if nothing had happened. He did not comment on her decision to eat. He did not try to use the moment to start a conversation. He simply let her eat in peace while he focused on his instruments. This pattern continued over the next few hours. Marcus would announce what he was doing before he did it. He would explain technical details about his equipment or the storm. He would provide things that Lyra needed without making a big show of helping her, and gradually some of the tension in the shelter began to ease. The breakthrough came when Marcus was adjusting one of his monitoring instruments and made a frustrated sound. The electromagnetic interference was affecting one of his sensors in an unexpected way. He was having trouble getting accurate readings from the upper atmosphere. "Your calibration matrix is probably being affected by the secondary harmonics," Lyra said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but it was the first time she had spoken without being asked a direct question. Marcus looked up from his instruments. "You are right. I had not considered that. How would you suggest compensating for it?" Lyra hesitated for a moment. Then her scientific training took over. "Try adjusting the base frequency by 12% and adding a filtering algorithm that accounts for the harmonic interference patterns." Marcus made the adjustments she suggested. The readings immediately became much clearer and more accurate. He smiled and looked back at her. "That worked perfectly. Thank you." For the first time since entering the shelter, Lyra looked pleased rather than afraid. She had helped solve a scientific problem. It was what she had been trained to do her entire life. For a moment, she had forgotten that she was talking to a human. The conversation continued from there. Marcus asked Lyra about her research on the planet. She explained that she had been studying extremophile organisms that lived in electromagnetic fields. Her crashed ship had contained samples of several previously unknown species. Marcus found her research fascinating. He had spent months on this planet, but had never looked for life forms that might thrive in the electromagnetic storms. It had never occurred to him that such organisms might exist. As they talked, Lyra began to relax slightly. She was still keeping her distance and watching Marcus carefully. But she was no longer pressed against the wall like a trapped animal. She was sitting more naturally and participating in the conversation like the scientist she was. Marcus noticed that Lyra was still injured. The burns on her arms needed treatment. Her biosuit was completely useless now and would need to be replaced. But he also noticed something else. She was beginning to listen to his explanations with genuine interest rather than fear. When Marcus explained how his shielding systems worked, Lyra asked technical questions. When he described his methods for predicting storm patterns, she offered suggestions based on her own research. When he talked about the isolation and loneliness of working alone on a frontier planet, she admitted that she understood those feelings. Most importantly, Lyra was starting to see Marcus as an individual rather than as a representative of a scary species. He was not the emotionless predator that HFY Stories described. He was a scientist who loved his work. He was someone who had chosen to live alone on a dangerous planet because he found the storms beautiful and fascinating. As the hours passed, Lyra found herself confused. Everything she had been taught about humans suggested that Marcus should be cold, calculating, and dangerous. But the human sitting across the room was warm, enthusiastic about his research, and genuinely concerned for her welfare. The contradiction was difficult for her to understand. Late in the evening, Marcus noticed that Lyra was swaying slightly where she sat. Her injuries and exhaustion were catching up with her. She needed medical attention and proper rest, but she was still too afraid to let him get close enough to help. "I'm going to place some medical supplies near your food area," Marcus announced. "There are treatments for burns and infection. There are also pain medications that are safe for HFY physiology. You can use them if you want to." Marcus carefully placed the medical kit where Lyra could reach it without coming near him. Then he returned to his monitoring station and continued working. He did not watch to see if she used the supplies. He did not offer advice about how to treat her injuries. He simply made the help available and let her decide what to do. An hour later, Marcus noticed that Lyra had used some of the medical supplies. The burns on her arms were properly bandaged. She looked more comfortable and alert. She was still watching him, but the desperate fear had been replaced by cautious curiosity. The storm was far from over. They would be spending several more days together in the shelter. But already something had changed. Lyra was beginning to see that her assumptions about humans might not be completely accurate. And Marcus was beginning to hope that he might be able to prove that humans were not the monsters that the galaxy believed them to be. By the second day of the storm, Lyra had begun asking Marcus questions. They started as technical questions about his equipment and research, but gradually they became more personal. She wanted to understand why a human would choose to live alone on such a dangerous planet. Marcus explained that he had always been fascinated by extreme weather. Even as a child on Earth, he had loved thunderstorms and hurricanes. Other children were afraid of lightning, but Marcus found it beautiful and exciting. When he learned about electromagnetic storms on frontier planets, he knew he had to study them. "But why alone?" Lyra asked. "HFY always work in research teams. We share the dangers and support each other. Why do humans choose isolation?" Marcus thought about this question for a while before answering. "We do not always choose isolation, but sometimes the most important work requires taking risks that others are not willing to take. And sometimes we find that we work better when we can focus completely on what we are studying." This answer troubled Lyra. It sounded like the kind of reckless behavior that made other species afraid of humans. But as she watched Marcus work, she could see that his approach to risk was not careless. He took careful precautions. He planned for every possible problem. He just accepted dangers that other species would avoid completely. "Do you ever get lonely?" Lyra asked. "Of course," Marcus replied. "I miss talking to other people. I miss sharing my discoveries with colleagues who understand what they mean. I miss having someone to help when things go wrong. But the loneliness is worth it for the chance to study something that no one has ever studied before." Lyra found this honesty surprising. The stories about humans suggested that they did not experience normal emotions like loneliness or fear. But Marcus was openly admitting to feelings that any HFY would understand. He was not the emotionless machine that her people's stories described. As they continued talking, Lyra began to share more about her own research and background. She explained that she had been studying extremophile organisms throughout the galaxy. Her specialty was life forms that lived in environments where other species thought life was impossible. "The organisms I was studying here are remarkable," Lyra said. "They actually feed on electromagnetic energy. During storms like this one, they become more active and reproduce more quickly. It is like the storms are their spring season." Marcus was fascinated by this information. He had been recording data about the storms for months, but he had never considered that the electromagnetic activity might be supporting life. It was an entirely new way of thinking about the planet's ecosystem. Could those organisms be affecting the storm patterns? Marcus asked. If they are feeding on electromagnetic energy, they might be influencing how the energy flows through the atmosphere. Lyra's eyes lit up with excitement. That is exactly what I was trying to determine when my ship crashed. I think there might be a symbiotic relationship between the organisms and the electromagnetic fields. The storms feed the organisms and the organisms help shape the storms. This was the kind of scientific discussion that both of them loved. For several hours they exchanged ideas and theories about how electromagnetic life forms might work. Lyra almost forgot that she was talking to a human. Marcus almost forgot that she had been terrified of him just the day before. But late on the second day, something happened that reminded both of them about the differences between their species. Lyra's biosuit finally failed completely. The life support systems that had been keeping her alive in the planet's atmosphere stopped working. The shelter's atmosphere was breathable for both humans and Zilani. But Lyra's body chemistry required different humidity levels and trace gases than what Marcus normally maintained. Without her biosuit supplements, she would slowly become sick and eventually die. Marcus noticed the problem immediately when Lyra began showing signs of respiratory distress. Her breathing became labored. Her skin color changed from blue to a pale gray. She was trying to hide her symptoms, but Marcus could see that she was in trouble. Your biosuit has failed, Marcus said. You need atmospheric modifications or you will not survive much longer. Lyra looked down at her damaged suit and realized he was right. The status indicators that she had been trying to ignore were now showing complete system failure. She was breathing the shelter's unmodified atmosphere and it was slowly poisoning her. I can modify the atmospheric systems to support Zilani physiology, Marcus said, but I will need to work on the life support controls, and I will need to share my own atmospheric reserves to keep both of us alive. Lyra stared at him in shock. What he was offering to do was incredibly dangerous. If he made a mistake while modifying the life support systems, both of them could die. And even if he succeeded, sharing atmospheric reserves meant that he would be taking a serious risk to his own survival. Why would you do that? Lyra asked. Why would you risk your own life to save mine? Marcus looked at her as if the question was strange. Because you need help, and because it is the right thing to do. This simple answer shook Lyra more than anything else that had happened. According to everything she had been taught about humans, they were supposed to be selfish and calculating. They were supposed to help others only when they could gain something in return. But Marcus was offering to risk his life for a Zilani he had just met, and he seemed to think this was normal behavior. Marcus was already moving toward the life support controls. He began the complex process of modifying the atmospheric mixture to support both human and Zilani physiology. It was dangerous work that required precise calculations and careful adjustments. As she watched him work, Lyra realized that she was seeing something that most members of her species never witnessed. She was seeing a human put himself at risk to help someone else, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Marcus worked for 6 hours straight, making adjustments and running tests to ensure that the modified atmosphere would be safe for both of them. He shared his food reserves without being asked. He gave up his sleeping area so that Lyra could rest more comfortably. He did all of this while working on a problem that could kill both of them if he made a single mistake. When the atmospheric modifications were complete, Lyra could breathe easily for the first time since her biosuit had been damaged. She felt stronger and more alert. But more than that, she felt confused about everything she had believed about humans. That night, as Marcus slept on an uncomfortable makeshift bed so that Lyra could use the proper sleeping area, she lay awake thinking about what she had witnessed. This human had saved her life twice now. He had shared his resources. He had worked tirelessly to solve her problems. And he had done it all without asking for anything in return. Lyra was beginning to understand that everything her people believed about humans might be wrong. Or at least it might be incomplete. Yes, humans were dangerous and unpredictable, but they were dangerous in the way that a storm was dangerous, powerful and potentially destructive, but also capable of creating something beautiful and life-giving. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Lyra found herself wondering what other misconceptions her people might have about the species they feared so much. And she wondered what would happen when she returned to Zilani space with a very different story about humans than anyone expected to hear. The storm lasted for 5 more days. During that time, Marcus and Lyra worked together to survive and continue their research. What had started as a desperate rescue had become an unexpected collaboration between two scientists from very different species. Lyra shared her knowledge about the electromagnetic life forms, while Marcus provided data about the storm patterns he had been tracking. Together, they began to understand how the organisms and the storms worked together in ways that neither of them could have discovered alone. More importantly for Lyra, she had spent a week watching a human behave in ways that contradicted everything she had been taught. Marcus was not emotionless or calculating. He was enthusiastic about his work, concerned about her welfare, and willing to sacrifice his own comfort to help her. On the morning of the 6th day, the storm finally began to weaken. The electromagnetic pulses became less frequent. The winds died down to levels that would not immediately kill anyone caught outside. Through the observation window, they could see patches of normal sky appearing between the clouds. By evening, the storm had passed completely. Marcus activated his emergency beacon to signal for rescue ships. Within hours, they received a response. A Zilani research vessel was in the system and would arrive to pick up Lyra within 2 days. As they waited for the rescue ship, Lyra and Marcus continued their discussions about the electromagnetic life forms. But Lyra was also thinking about something else. She was thinking about what she would tell her people when she returned to Zilani space. "Marcus," she said on their last evening together, "I need to ask you something. Why do humans have such a terrible reputation throughout the galaxy? The stories about your species make you sound like monsters, but you are nothing like those stories describe." Marcus was quiet for a long time before answering. "I think it is because other species do not understand what motivates us. They see that we are willing to fight and take risks, and they assume we must be violent and reckless. They do not understand that we usually fight to protect things we care about, and we take risks to achieve things we believe are important. But the stories make it sound like humans feel no fear and form no emotional attachments," Lyra said. Marcus laughed softly. "That is exactly backwards. We feel fear just like everyone else. We just do not let fear stop us from doing what we think is right, and we form very strong emotional attachments. That is usually why we are willing to fight so hard. We are protecting people and things we care about." Lyra thought about this explanation. It made sense of many things she had observed during their time together. Marcus had been afraid when he was modifying the life support systems. She had seen the worry in his eyes when he was not sure if his calculations were correct, but he had done the dangerous work anyway because she needed help. When the rescue ship arrived, Lyra felt conflicted about leaving. She had learned so much during her time in the shelter, not just about electromagnetic life forms, but about humans. She knew that her report about this experience would challenge many assumptions that her people held. The rescue team was surprised to find Lyra healthy and safe. They had expected to find her injured or traumatized from being trapped with a human. Instead, they found her engaged in animated scientific discussions with Marcus about their joint research. As Lyra prepared to leave, she made Marcus a promise. "I am going to tell my people the truth about what happened here. I am going to explain that the stories about humans are not complete. There is more to your species than the galaxy understands." Marcus smiled. "I would appreciate that. But I understand if your people do not believe you. Fear is easier to maintain than understanding." When Lyra returned to Zilani space, she immediately began writing detailed reports about her experience. She described not just her scientific discoveries, but her observations about human behavior. She explained how Marcus had saved her life multiple times without asking for anything in return. She described his emotional reactions, his scientific curiosity, and his willingness to sacrifice for a stranger. At first, her colleagues were skeptical. The scientific data about electromagnetic life forms was accepted immediately. Lyra was a respected researcher, and her findings were supported by solid evidence. But her observations about human behavior were questioned. Many Zilani found it difficult to believe that humans could be so different from their reputation. However, Lyra was persistent. She presented her observations as scientific data, just like any other research findings. She pointed out that the stories about humans were based mostly on second-hand accounts and ancient conflicts. Her report was based on direct observation over an extended period under stressful conditions. Gradually, some of her colleagues began to listen. Other xenobiologists became interested in studying human behavior more systematically. Diplomats began to wonder if the fear of humans might be preventing beneficial relationships between species. Lyra's report was eventually shared with other species throughout the galaxy. It became one of the first scientific studies of human behavior written by a non-human observer. While it did not immediately change centuries of fear and misunderstanding, it began a conversation about whether the galaxy's assumptions about humans were accurate. Marcus continued his research on Kepler 442b, but he was no longer completely alone. Lyra arranged for other scientists to visit and collaborate with him. Some were Zelani who wanted to study the electromagnetic life forms. Others were researchers from different species who were curious about human scientific methods. The monitoring station became an unofficial research center where scientists from multiple species worked together. Marcus found himself in the unexpected role of ambassador, helping other species understand that humans were neither the emotionless machines nor the violent predators that stories portrayed. Years later, when Lyra was appointed as the first Zelani ambassador to human space, she often thought back to the storm that had brought her and Marcus together. She remembered her terror when she first saw him, and how that terror had gradually been replaced by understanding and friendship. The galaxy never completely stopped being afraid of humans, but fear began to mix with other emotions: respect for human determination, admiration for human compassion, and hope that maybe the universe was not as dangerous as it had seemed when everyone was too afraid to work together. Marcus and Lyra remained friends and research partners for the rest of their careers. Their joint studies of electromagnetic life forms led to discoveries that changed how the galaxy understood life in extreme environments. But perhaps more importantly, their friendship served as proof that different species could overcome fear and suspicion to build something better together. Sometimes, when electromagnetic storms rolled across Kepler 442b, Lyra would return to visit the little shelter where she had first learned that the most frightening thing about humans was not their capacity for destruction, but their infinite capacity for hope and kindness. And she would remember that sometimes the most important discoveries happen not in laboratories or research stations, but in the small moments when two very different beings choose to trust each other despite their fears. The storm still came to Kepler 442b, as powerful and beautiful as ever. But now they brought not just electromagnetic displays and scientific data, but also the memory of how a storm had once brought two species together and changed both of their worlds forever.